What's up, guys? Another slight losing day yesterday. We can call it 3-3, or I guess slightly worse than 3-3, I guess, because the way that I split up the Super Bowl was I had a regular play on San Francisco at the -1. So I did typically I just have 3-unit play on every single thing. So that's what I had there. And then the props, I kind of wanted to split up sort of across 3 units, but it wound up being a little bit more than that. So I had 1 unit on each of the game props that I had and a half unit on each of the player props, which I guess a little bit lucky for me because those are the two that didn't get there. But the Mahomes under absolutely should have gotten there. I mean, if it didn't, if the game didn't go into overtime, he was going to be under. I think he was in the 230s or something prior to it going into overtime. He had like 180 or something on the game until that final drive that they had that tied the game or whatever. And then even with all that being said, there was one pass that he had that was a 52-yard pass that San Francisco's defender, there were two defenders there, and one of them just was like he had no idea where the ball was. And if he did, they probably would have been able to break up that pass somehow or defend it. So that pass wouldn't have happened. So a lot of stuff had to go wrong for that to not cash. The Mahomes passing yard under there. You needed the game to both go into overtime and you needed that 50-whatever yard pass to happen, and they both happened. So it was a lot of that going on in that game. McCaffrey, even with overtime, didn't quite get there. I think he wound up around 80. Very low for him. He had 20 rushing attempts or something like that. So enough attempts that he probably should have gone over, possibly even without the overtime. But it was just kind of bizarre. Like, I don't even know if Kansas City really shut him down as much as San Francisco I don't think was using him correctly. They were throwing the ball on too many first downs, it seemed to me. And it's like, what is this, the Baltimore Ravens again? I don't get that. But that whole game is just a mess. And it's just going to convince me more that the NFL is scripted in some way. I know a lot of people are saying that, but I just kind of think it's true, man, because San Francisco, they came out on fire, man, and they had the lead for almost the entire game, pretty much. Although they just never could extend the lead, but they looked like the better team in the game, especially earlier on in the game. They were the team that had way more yards, more time of possession. It probably didn't end up that way. I think it was a close game statistically in the end, but they were looking really good. And then it took a couple of freak plays for them to not win the game, where if any one of those plays went differently, they would have won the game. Obviously, they had the blocked extra point, and if that had gone through, they would have wound up, I believe, probably winning the game, not even by one, because it would have forced Kansas City to have to get a touchdown instead of a field goal. So you never know what would have happened there. So they might have wound up winning in regulation by whatever it would have been, like 4 points instead. So if the blocked extra point doesn't happen, they probably get there. Obviously, the main thing was Kansas City didn't even have any like actual touchdown drives in the entirety of regulation. The only touchdown drive they had, so they had the one in overtime, obviously. That was the one long touchdown drive they had. In the entire rest of the game, they didn't have one. They only had field goals, and then the one touchdown was set up, or I think they got possession of the ball in the red zone already, or almost in the red zone already, after that freak play where Kansas City punted it and it bounced off of one of the 49ers players' feet. So then the 49ers return men had no choice but to try to recover it, because now it's a live ball. That's just a freak fluke occurrence, man. It's just insane. If that doesn't happen, Kansas City doesn't get set up for that touchdown, and I think San Francisco probably wins the game in that case too. And then, of course, San Francisco had a ton of injuries in the game. All of their players are going down. They lost Greenlaw, who's one of their best defenders, the linebacker there. Him being gone, that really helped Kelsey, because Kelsey was doing nothing in the game prior to that. And then Greenlaw goes out and he starts taking over the game. So I think that played a huge part in it. Debo got hurt, although he came back into the game pretty quickly, but he obviously wasn't 100%. His hamstring didn't look right when he came back in, so that hurt San Francisco's offense a bit as well. San Francisco lost somebody in their secondary late in the game as well, and they lost George Kittle, I believe on the final drive of regulation, maybe something like that. So he was out, so he wasn't there on that drive, which maybe if he's in there, San Francisco is able to convert a touchdown instead of having to get a field goal in the first drive overtime. Just a lot of BS going on there. And I still just kind of think it's scripted, man. For Kansas City to pull off 3 straight wins like that, all as underdogs, I just think it's BS, man. I have enough history with this that I can tell you that otherwise, I'm pretty sure that San Francisco was the right side, and it was looking that way in the game last night as well. like I've just been doing this for a long time. When you see the market behave the way that it did in that game, I mean, you can go watch my videos where I describe what was going on with the market, but lot of market signals on the San Francisco side, and especially as it turned out, like, which I knew was going to be the case anyway, like all of the biggest like professional bets were all on the San Francisco side as far as the bets on the side were concerned, despite all the public being on Kansas City. So that's a game where you would only want to be on San Francisco, except for the fact that the NFL might be rigging the whole thing. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. And that was not a very good end, even though the rest of the props got there. So that was decent enough. No score in the first 6 minutes. That was like pretty much no sweat whatsoever. Well, San Francisco looked like they were going to score on the opening drive real quick. And then, of course, they fumbled the ball over. So I guess maybe it was a little bit of a sweat. So that would have made a difference in the game, too. So I'd have taken that if San Francisco won the game. I'd have taken the loss on the 6-minute prop if San Francisco was going to win the game, because I had more on the game than that prop. But the 6-minute one cashed. The either team 3 consecutive scores cashed with Kansas City after they were down 10-0. They scored 13 unanswered, so that did that. 2 field goals and a touchdown. And then what was the other one that got there? I don't even remember. Oh, the other prop that got there was, of course, neither team to score 30 points. Obviously, we know that happened, even with it going into overtime. The game was so low scoring that it still happened with ease. And guess what? Wait, no, did it still go? I guess it did still go under. It hit the 47, so I guess it still went under the 47. I was going to say it actually went over the total, kind of like I warned against, but it was a lot less dicey to play it the way that I did, with the no team scoring 30. So there was all that, and then I won on the NBA game easily with the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was good. The Vancouver Canucks scared me a little bit. They had to win in overtime, so maybe it wasn't the best play to be on them as a substantial favorite, but the line went up even further. I got like a decent number on it at minus 170 when I think it went off at like minus 185. So that kind of worried me a little bit. But Vancouver did wind up getting there, even though it required overtime to do so. So they still did do it. And then college basketball is just insanely frustrating. Both of those could have cashed. Especially I think the Tulsa one should have. I mean, Tulsa was hanging around within the number. It was a lower scoring game, just kind of a bad, ugly game. Not really the type of game that UAB tends to really want to play exactly, I would say. And it just did not quite get there because it came down to intentional free throws at the end, which usually when that happens, you wind up seeing the game get up into the 7 range, and that's what happened. I needed the 3.5, and Tulsa was within the 3.5 pretty late in the game, in like the final minutes of the game. I think they were still like down a couple points there, and then it just ran out for them, and they had to intentionally foul a couple of times. That really sucks because they definitely could have covered. They had some chances to maybe win the game as well outright at some points late in the game there. So that was close. That played like a game where the team that's at home as a 3.5 point underdog should cover it, and it didn't get there. And then Iowa was way behind, so I don't know if I can complain as much about that, but the way that the game played and the way that it ended, I still think I should have won that bet. It was very frustrating. The game wound up being a very high-scoring game, a very high-paced game, which benefits Iowa, and that's what I said. Iowa was going to be able to control the pace, speed up the pace of that game, and that's exactly what they did, which is not the type of game Minnesota wants to play. Minnesota needs to like slow the pace down, especially when they want to cover as an underdog there. But it was just Minnesota was hitting just an absurd amount of three-pointers. In the first matchup that they played against Iowa, I think Iowa was actually not that bad at defending the three, although Iowa themselves aren't really a good three-point shooting team like they have been in the past. They're a good scoring team, but they score a lot in the paint now, and they have like very efficient offense, but they don't really sling it from three the way that we're used to with some of these Iowa teams. With I don't even know if Fran McCaffrey is still there, but that's kind of his calling card. But Iowa doesn't do that as much this year. At Minnesota, the first matchup between the two, Minnesota shot like a really low percentage from three, like somewhere in the 20%, 20s% range, something 20-something percent, which is a little bit low. You kind of expect Minnesota to probably shoot like in the 30-something% range, I guess. I don't know what their actual stats are on the season. They're not like the greatest shooting team, though. But in that game, throughout almost the majority of the game, it was like deep into the second half, Minnesota was still shooting like 70% or 67% from three-point range, which is how they had a huge lead. They were leading by double digits in the first half and into the second half. It's just completely ridiculous. They were winning by like in the teens, and it was all just because they were not missing from three-point range. They're shooting 70% from three for more than half of a game is just absolutely absurd. and that's what Minnesota was doing. But then Iowa, is still enough the better team, and they were controlling the pace enough that they came all the way back, took the lead, and I was watching that game, and I was like, oh boy, Iowa's getting closer here. I wasn't really expecting them to do it, but I'm like, man, if Iowa can actually like tie this game, like get a small lead and then get it to intentional free throws, they might actually be able to cover the 6-point spread here or whatever. It was 6 or 6.5. I forget what it was. And that actually basically should have happened. Iowa wound up taking the lead, and they actually had the lead by 8 with 3 seconds left. So they were about to cover in the end after all that, which I think kind of a deserving cover, like I said, because the pace of the game, the way the game played out, especially the way the second half played out, was all Iowa's type of game there, man. It was all Iowa. They were up 8 with 3 seconds left. And what happened? Of course, Minnesota hit a 3-pointer at the buzzer that was completely meaningless as far as the game was concerned. The game was over, but of course they threw up a 3 because I guess why not? They did it, and I didn't see it, but it gets to the point where Iowa's probably just not even bothering to defend it because who cares at that point? The game is over. But I care because it was an 8-point game, and that 3 cost me the spread there. So I absolutely hate that when it's just a completely meaningless shot right at the end there to backdoor cover the whole thing. That's just awful. I think Iowa should have done it. Very frustrating. Moving on to today. It's a Monday. We have a small card here. So I only have 2 plays. I don't have anything in the NHL. It's a very small NHL card. I don't even know if it's worth really discussing any of these games. So I don't really see much of an angle in any of these games. So it's just, I'm staying away completely. College basketball, we have a pretty small card as well. A lot of the smaller conference games are playing. A lot of it is like the MEAC and the SWAC, I think, and whatever. And I don't tend to get involved in those games at all, really. Kind of depends, but very rarely I'm in those like very, very bottom conferences because I just don't see teams like really being in like giant letdown situations necessarily in conferences that are so weak that every team is just really weak. But we do have Wake Forest and Duke is kind of one of the biggest games tonight, which is, Duke should probably win that game, although you never really know. Duke is up from 6.5 to 7. Duke is always a little bit overvalued, so I would not want to play the Duke side in that one. KenPom's got got Duke, them. The Duke has Duke a little bit overrated, I would say. He actually has them as the 13th ranked team, but then he has Wake at 28th. So he actually has, so even though Duke overrated, he doesn't have Duke in the top 10, which is where they're in the rankings there. So he has Duke a little bit overrated, overranked there, but he has Wake Forest really kind of sneaky there in the 20s. So I would actually lean to the Wake Forest side in there just because the power ratings kind of have it a little bit off from where the number is, at Duke being 7. KenPom, I think, has this around 6, somewhere around there. And Wake Forest, of course, they always play like the little brother role to Duke. So neither team's really coming off like a game where it's a situation that that would have me leaning one way or the other. Really, I think both teams are going to be in a situation where they'll probably show up for this one. But Wake has more motivation there because Duke, of course, Duke, they're obviously going to make the tournament. They're going to be like probably, probably around the 3 or 4 line in the tournament, I would guess at this point. I don't think that much is going to change as far as that is concerned. But Wake Forest, they need to pad their tournament resume, man, even though I think the bracketology kind of has them sort of like in the tournament at this point, but I think it's a little bit dicey, even though KenPom has them ranked 28th or whatever. So they should probably get in. They're a pretty decent team, but Wake Forest, so not only are they the little brother here to Duke, so that gives them a little bit of added motivation in any game against Duke, but the tournament resume aspect of it also adds a little bit of motivation to Wake. So I would kind of lean to Wake there. The game I'll actually play, though, in college basketball is one of those situations where it's almost like a situation where you have a ranked team that's a road underdog against an unranked team, but it's not quite that because this is number 4 Kansas at number 23 Texas Tech, but it's still a big ranking discrepancy here with Kansas being ranked 4, Texas Tech 23, but Texas Tech actually the favorite at home, and they've actually gone up from 1 with juice, it looks like, to 2 with juice. I think you could still get -2 out there. I was able to get the -2, although I'm a little bit hesitant there because the power ratings guys kind of have Kansas winning this game by like 1, even though like KenPom, even so, he still does have Kansas being like overrated though. Like, Kansas is always going to be overvalued, man. So I don't know if I would like use just the power ratings here to make the decision. And when it's a situation where the number is still kind of just like a pick the winner type of situation there, I think it's probably okay to like lay the 2 with Texas Tech. I wouldn't want to go much higher than that though. But I mean, Kansas is still overrated. I mean, they're ranked 4th in the country. Everybody talks about them as a title contender pretty much every year, but I don't think they're in that upper echelon of teams, man. KenPom has them ranked 14th. They've kind of been in that range like the whole time. He has Texas Tech a bit lower at 38, but he has Texas Tech as the better offensive team fairly significantly, ranked 13th in offensive efficiency. Kansas 32nd. Although he has Kansas as the better defensive team, 14th versus Texas Tech down at 88. So Texas Tech, not a very good. You kind of think of them as being one of those defensive Texas Tech teams. So that's not the case. They're a much better scoring team. But Texas Tech also slows the pace way down. So at 273 in pace, whereas Kansas is up at 106 in tempo. So Kansas likes to push the pace a little more. So this could be a game where Texas Tech, they're an efficient offensive team, but they also play a slower pace game as well, playing more half-court style game stuff. And I think that could frustrate Kansas a little bit, with Kansas being a team that wants to run a little bit more, and you kind of expect the home team to be able to control the pace a little bit more than the road team will. So I like that aspect of it too, where it's kind of a pace collision here. And these teams have not played this year. I think this is the only time they play each other this year. Big 12 is big enough that not all the teams play all the other teams twice this year. So this is the only matchup between these two teams. So I like that aspect of it. I think Texas Tech might be able to ugly up the game a bit and get the game into a style that Kansas is less happy with, that might frustrate Kansas a bit more, make them a little bit less comfortable. But Kansas is also coming off a few big games in a row, really, if you think about it. So they came off the big game against Houston. And then, of course, I thought they were in a letdown spot coming off of that, going to Kansas State. But they played tough in that game, but also Kansas State really stepped it up for that game. Kansas State was coming off some ugly game against Oklahoma State or something. Kansas State made that their game of the year, man. They really showed up for that one. And it still wound up being a pretty tough battle between both teams. So another tough game for Kansas there. Which they wound up losing by 5. Then they came back home, and in their last game, they beat Baylor, and that was a tough battle, too. I think even though Kansas is slightly the better team there, that's still considered to be like kind of a heavyweight type of fight, man. I mean, these are 2 of the Big 12 like powerhouses. It's Kansas Baylor. I think it was one of the national ESPN games. Whenever it's Kansas Baylor, it's a big game, and everybody's paying attention to it. Like, those tend to be 2 teams that are like always near the top of the Big 12, and Kansas is 3rd, Baylor's 4th in the conference right now. That was a big game for them, man. So they beat Baylor. That's a big game in the conference, but now they have to go on the road again to Texas Tech off of kind of a big win and a pretty tough game against Baylor. And now they go on the road to Lubbock, Texas, which not that easy a place to play, really, where Texas Tech might be able to play a more slow grinding game and kind of frustrate them. And Texas Tech's coming off a pretty bad performance. And in the game before that, they also lost to Baylor. So, of course, the public is only going to want to be on Kansas here. I mean, Kansas is the much higher ranked team. Everybody's going to also see that Kansas beat Baylor, although Texas Tech lost to Baylor, but it was on the road, and it was a fairly close game. But I think I was on Texas Tech in that one, and it pushed. Unfortunately for me, that was that game where Texas Tech just went completely silent offensively, even though they're a good offensive team. So I don't know how that happened. So probably should have been better than a push there. So that pissed me off. But Texas Tech, coming off that game against Baylor there. But, the public is only going to want to be on Kansas here, man. Like, they're going to say, wait a minute, I get Kansas. Everybody knows the name Kansas. They're ranked top 4 in the country. Although, of course, as I mentioned, they're not actually the 4th best team in the country, but the public always considers them to be one of the top teams. They're ranked as one of the top teams. Public is going to look at this and think, wow, this is value. I get Kansas as an underdog against a lower ranked Texas Tech team with a worse record here. Give me Kansas. That's what they're going to think. I think it looks too easy, so there is that aspect of it too. And these types of plays in college basketball have been pretty decent money makers this year, and I've been staying off of a lot of them recently because of the power rating aspect of it. But this one, I think the situation lines up well enough, and the power ratings aren't far enough off that I want to get away from it, where power ratings are off by like 3 from where the number is at the moment, the power ratings I look at. But because it's all kind of, it goes across the pick'em number there, and it's all kind of within the range of like kind of just pick the winner, I still think it's okay to do. And because this type of game has been like a pretty decent moneymaker in college basketball this year, especially the ranked team going on the road to an unranked team, or the unranked team is favored. This has that kind of like smell to it, even though Texas Tech is just in the rankings there, but it has a very similar vibe to it. But so obviously the public's only going to want Kansas here. They're going to think there's value in Kansas. I think they're mistaken. But also Texas Tech, you look at their what they did in their last game. They played UCF. They were coming off that tough game against Baylor, and then they played UCF at home. And even though Texas Tech led the whole way, they never really like got like a huge lead in the game. I think their biggest lead in the game was maybe 10 early on, and for the rest of the game, they were leading by single digits, even though they actually never trailed in the game. The game was close like the whole way, man. They were winning the whole game, but it was really close deep into the game, like into like with 2 minutes left in the game. Neither team was shooting that well percentage-wise. The game was pretty close, and UCF was still within 1 point of them in the final like 2 minutes of the game. So I think that's a little bit of a scare for Texas Tech, and they might have been looking ahead to this Kansas game a little bit. So I think that's going to help Texas refocus. I think it's going to motivate them when you have, a pretty good team like Texas Tech, and they are a pretty big favorite. They're an 8.5-point favorite in that game, and they don't play well in the game, and they come close to losing the game. That kind of like causes them to refocus, put a scare into them. And of course, I mean, there's reason to focus anyway, because it's Kansas coming to your house. So I like it. I think Texas Tech's going to show up focused here, whereas Kansas might have a little bit less focus on this game after playing a big game against Baylor in the previous game. Whereas, like I said, Texas Tech is coming out of kind of an escape against a lesser team. So I like it. I like Texas Tech. I'll do it at -2, where it's still just kind of a pick the winner situation. We got to start turning this around, man. I had a kind of a similar like downswing last year, like around the same time of year. I don't know why it's happening again, but this one's been a little bit worse. And I know last year, right after that, I had a nice run, like right after that into like April, and recouped all of it. So it's going to be difficult to do, but maybe we'll be able to get it. Like, let's start seeing things right. And then I do have one play in the NBA today as well. There's a decent size NBA card today, but not too many situations that I really like on the board today. But the one that I do like is that I'm going to be on the Utah Jazz, even though it looks like this line, according to pregame, this line looks like it's flipped from the Warriors as a 2-point underdog to a 1-point road favorite. I'm not sure if I quite understand that. I don't know if there are injuries involved here on the Utah side, but I'm just looking at the situation here. So, looks like Otto Porter, he's listed as game time decision, so he may or may not play tonight. I don't even really know if he's going to. He is one of the better players on the Jazz, of course. I don't know how long he's been out. It hasn't been that long, I guess. He's missed the last 2 games. Oh, wait a minute. What am I looking at here? No, he hasn't been playing that many minutes, though, so I don't even know if that's – I thought he was a starter, but, I think he's kind of assumed like a smaller role, so I don't think that really matters that much. For some reason, I thought he was a starter, but I'm not paying enough attention here. I'm thinking of the other Porter. What is it, Michael Porter? I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm out of my mind here. I'm still hallucinating from doing that one-chip challenge last night. All right, so I don't think there are any significant injuries here, so I don't really get why the line has moved like that. But what we do have is Golden State being a 1-point favorite right now on the road. Somehow they flipped to the favorite, but it looks like the money, the cash discrepancy is not supporting that at all. It looks like Golden State's the public team with 90% of the tickets, and they only have 68% of the cash because, of course, Golden State has started to look like the Golden State that we remember, as they've won 4 games in a row. 5 of their last 6, they've been playing pretty good basketball. But as I pointed out, not many of those games are really that impressive. Beating the 76ers twice without Joel Embiid, they've fallen apart without him. They haven't been good. They beat the Grizzlies without Morant. They lost to the Hawks. They beat the Nets. Not impressive, really. They beat the Pacers. That's a fairly decent win. And then they did beat the Suns, unfortunately, in their most recent game. And that beat me. And it beat me on the final buzzer pretty much, even though Golden State was winning a majority of that game. So I was going to get maybe a little bit lucky with Phoenix covering that, but I had Phoenix -1, and they had taken the lead by the end of it. And they were up 2. They had come all the way back, taken the lead, a 2-point lead with almost no time left. And of course, Steph Curry hits this like off balance deep 3 from like well behind the arc just because he had to throw up a desperation shot. And of course, it goes in, and Golden State wins the game. And it was at home. That's a big win, dude. You beat Phoenix. I mean, Golden State didn't really have any great wins leading up to that, really, as I just pointed out. So that's a big win, beating Phoenix, who was one of the teams that made a pretty decent playoff run last year. Big win. And the way that you do it in such dramatic fashion, that's a huge win. They only have 1 day off now. They have to go into elevation to play Utah, who's been struggling now. Utah's fallen below 500 now. Utah was on a nice run for a while, but then since then they've really come crashing back down. They've lost a lot of games recently. So the public is only going to want to be on Golden State, seeing what they've seen out of them recently. Golden State actually now has the better record. They've pulled into a position where they're at a 500 record. And now Utah Jazz, they need to win this game to get back to 500. So I think that might motivate them just a little bit, just because it has that kind of mental thing where you don't want to be sitting at below 500 where you're just above 500. So I think Utah is going to be a little bit motivated for that reason to try to get back to 500, but also because, of course, it's Golden State coming into their house, and they've been playing pretty well recently. So I think Utah is going to have reasons to be focused in this game. I mean, you got Steph Curry coming into your house, so you're probably going to be motivated. But Golden State, like I said, they're coming off the dramatic win at the buzzer over Phoenix, have to go into elevation into Utah, and then after this game, they come back home and face the LA Clippers, who are one of the top teams in basketball at this point. Really, the Clippers really looking pretty good, looking like a team that's going to be a really tough out in the playoffs this year. So that's a big game coming up for Golden State. I think they might overlook Utah a little bit, and I don't know if this was one of the games that was postponed for Golden State's assistant coach death situation there, because they were supposed to play in Utah at the end of that road trip. That was where it happened, man. So this gives me a little bit of pause, just because I totally forgot about that. Just because Golden State, I mean, they're having to return to the place where it happened. But is that going to motivate them emotionally, or is that going to put them in a negative emotional state there? I'm not really sure about that, because if you throw that situation out, this is definitely a situation where you want to be on the Utah Jazz, but the market looks like it's still signaling on the Jazz quite a bit. So I don't know. I don't know if that's going to because Golden State, I mean, they already had their big emotional moment when they came back and started playing basketball again and won, basically win one for their coach there. So they already had that moment. So now that they're going into Utah again, I don't know, that might bring up some bad memories about it. And maybe it could even serve as a distraction. I don't know, but typically it wouldn't be a good spot. And I still think it's not a good spot otherwise. So for all the reasons I just said, it almost kind of makes it like a sandwich spot. Whereas Utah, I mean, I think they're just going to be continuing to play basketball. And they also just played Phoenix in their previous game. They didn't do well, and they lost by double digits. They lost by 14. So you look at this game, and it's just a pick the winner situation. The Warriors just beat Phoenix, and Utah just lost by double digits to Phoenix. So that aspect of it, who's gonna want to take the Utah Jazz here? Nobody's gonna want to take it. And of course, as I said, we know Golden State pretty heavily public in this game, with a lot less of the public cash on them than the ticket percentage, though. So everybody's only gonna want the Warriors here, doing that syllogism thing, thinking, well, if Golden State can beat Phoenix, and Phoenix blew out Utah, and you're giving me this line, just pick the winner here. Obviously, Golden State, it's so easy. But again, I think it looks way too easy. And Utah, yeah, so they're coming off that loss to Phoenix. It wasn't a very good loss, but they're also not really in a good spot, because they had won 2 games at home prior to that where they blew out the Milwaukee Bucks. Although I'm not sure if Giannis was there in that game, because he's kind of been in and out of the lineup. Yeah, he was. He played in that game. So Utah beat Milwaukee. Big win there. And then they turned around and played another really good game and beat Oklahoma City. So they were coming off 2 big home wins and having to go out on the road. It wasn't a good spot for them, having to go into Phoenix at that point. Was I on Phoenix in that one? I don't remember if I was. No, because Phoenix was coming off a nice win over the Bucks too. So I'm sure I stayed off of that one, but that was not a good spot for Utah there. So they didn't play well in that game, but now they've had 3 days off and they're coming back home. So they're the more rested team. And those 3 days off, I like it when you go into the extended time off on a loss, on a bad note. I like that aspect of it, because you use that time to refocus and to try to fix things. So that's what you do when you go into an extended rest period on a bad note. So that is the case with Utah. So I think they're going to refocus. I think they're going to be focused for Golden State here, of course, as if you need more reason to be focused on Golden State's coming into your house, man. And now Golden State has a better record than you do as well. So I think Utah's going to be focused here. It's a good spot for them to be refocused here, whereas might be a bit of a distracted spot for Golden State for all those reasons I said, and even like returning to the scene where the assistant coach's death, where that all happened, that might serve as a negative rather than a positive here, man, instead of getting them emotionally up for it, because they already had that emotional up moment there back after it happened when they came back and they beat Atlanta soundly in the first game back there on January 24th. So this might kind of bring up bad memories, but other than that, it is a sandwich spot. They're coming off that big emotional win over Phoenix, having to go into elevation, and they have the LA Clippers up next, who are one of the best teams in basketball, like I said. So I think it's kind of a sandwich spot. I don't think it's a good spot at all. So I like the Utah Jazz for all those reasons. So the two plays that I'm on here today, I want to go 2-0, man. I want to just start winning again. We got to start recouping all this bullshit. Let's do it, man. Texas Tech -2, and in college basketball, and Utah Jazz -1. Let's do it. Let's get it done. Oh, and I see here that it looks like the total actually in the Super Bowl, it actually got down to 46.5. So, man, if that went into overtime and it required 9 points to be scored in overtime to send it over, and you're on the under, that is a really, really bad beat, man. So that's why you get in on the under earlier, though. So the guys who took the under earlier still at least cashed that at the 47.5. And I think it might have been at 48 at some point as well. So hopefully the under players did do that, or hopefully you took my advice and you paid a little bit of the extra just to get the neither team scoring 30, because that seemed to really be the way to go there. And of course it was. So I got a lot of aspects about that game right, man. It's just it's so frustrating. It's so crazy. Nobody wants to see Kansas City win, man. Everybody's so sick of all that BS. And you have Travis Kelce out there just like, I don't know if he's roid raging or if he's starting to get CTE or what's going on there, but he's out there shoving Andy Reid, and like Kansas City was looking very discombobulated and looking very frustrated earlier in the game. I'm like, what are they doing, man? Because the game was like not out of hand at all. They're only losing by 10 at the worst point. So it's like, what are you doing? And I think when Kelce shoved Andy Reid, they're only down 3-0 at that point. I think it was after after a fumble or something. I don't even remember what it was, but you can't do that, man. You can't put your hands on your old coach like that, man. I don't know. I think a lot of people saw it. Like, I think we know what Travis Kelce is. Fuck the Chiefs. It's all of America was rooting against the Chiefs, I'm pretty sure, in that game, and nobody's happy about it. And after the game, like on Twitter, like everything that was trending was like rigged and scripted and all that. So people are seeing through it, man. We see you. It's all just such bullshit. It makes me not want to bet NFL anymore, but regular season NFL works out pretty well. Maybe just stop betting the playoffs. I don't know. Although I don't think I did that badly in the playoffs when it was all said and done. I think maybe I was a slight loser in the playoffs and then won on the season overall. So I don't know. But anyway, have a good start to the week, man. Let's have a good start to the week. Let's have a good Monday. Once again, Texas Tech -2 in college basketball, going to a sport that I actually enjoy watching, college basketball. And NBA, I don't love watching it, but I don't think it's scripted to that degree, at least, even though, of course, refs can, well, maybe it is, because refs can certainly swing things with fouls, which does piss me off, but it doesn't seem anywhere near as bad as the NFL at this point. So Texas Tech -2 in college basketball, and Utah Jazz +1 in the NBA. That's going to do it for me, man. Have a good start to the week. Let's have a good one. Peace out.